Happy New Year to all our amazing listeners. As we step into a brand new chapter, may this year be filled with stories of triumph, love, and hope. Let's embark on this journey together, weaving tales that inspire and uplift. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. May I speak to her, please? You're talking to her, young man, the woman said. How can I help you? It's complicated, I said. Long story short, my youngest daughter, as I just found out, is your granddaughter. You mean April Marie Adams? She asked. Yes, it is, I replied. Then perhaps you know my son, who I had to give up for adoption when I was only 15, she said. I might if I knew his name, I said. He was adopted by a family with the last name Barrow, and his middle name at the time was Luke Robert, Mrs. Smith said. My face turned white. Tears came to my parents' eyes because we knew the name well. Her honest, straightforward remark turned into a hellish nightmare for me. He's alive and well, I said. He's now a district attorney in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He is also my wife's boss. I can tell you that he's never been married, and now I think I know why. He's my only child, she said. I have stage 4 lung cancer, and I don't have long to live. Would you allow your daughter April to visit me before I come to the end of my life? If you can't afford it, I'll gladly pay for the ticket. I'd like to meet her to give her my inheritance. Mrs. Smith, under the circumstances, I'll let you make arrangements with my parents. Since you're only one state away, they will take her on a special weekend trip so you can get to know her, I said. I don't think I would let my daughter go on a trip like that alone. Is there anything else you want me to do? Get me a notarized statement authorizing my attorney to conduct a DNA test, Mrs. Smith said. Because of the value of April's inheritance, he will want to make sure she is who we think she is before changing my will? No problem. I'll pass this call on to my father, I said. He can work out the details and get directions on how to get to you. I stood up, walked out of the office, and handed Kathy my personal tape recorder saying, transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone conversation I'm still recording. I'll need them for the divorce court. Do you want me to process the authorization for the DNA test? Kathy asked. Katie was smart. She remembered that when I turned on the tape, she should listen in silence. In the past, this had been done and many conflicts were quickly resolved. Yes, I said, but we have to keep it a secret for a few weeks. I want to find out what my soon-to-be divorced wife does on Thursdays. I walked into my assistant's office and said, David, I need to speak with you and your wife as soon as possible. I'm going to need your cooperation on a personal matter. David looked at me and immediately realized that what I needed help with was very serious. She's about to be released from dispatch, David said. I'll text her to come right over. I went back to my office and we worked it out. Using my house key, they would pack April's clothes and leave the following Friday. I would pick her up from school and drop her off at their place by 10 o'clock. I was walking my parents to the exit when David's wife walked in. I told her to go to his office and I would join them shortly. Thanks to modern communications, Kathy already had copies made and transcribed. I gave a copy to David and Cheryl to read. I suggested that they first familiarize themselves with the conversation between my wife and me. I gave Kathy the paper my father had given me to make photocopies of what my father had received from my attorney's file that we were in the process of creating, and told her to find the best one for me. Both Cheryl and David had known my wife and me for many years. Both took what they learned today very hard. Cheryl and Grace grew up in each other's neighborhood. Although they were never close, they naturally knew everything about each other. She was shocked to learn the reality of what had remained unknown until now. Do you think there's any chance they're still lovers after all these years? Cheryl asked. Or was it one of those situations they got into and then realized their mistake? I don't know, but I'm going to need your cooperation to find out, I said. For the next few weeks, I need David to take the company car to travel to sales meetings. Cheryl, I'll need to drive your car because no one will be looking for it. So I need you to drive David's car. I'll let corporate know that we're doing this as part of your cross-training, David. So I'm afraid you'll have to do it for the next 3 months. You're going to follow your wife around on Thursday nights and write down everything you can, David said, because your wife will still believe you make your weekly trips. My intuition tells me it's still going on because why would my wife suddenly suggest I have an affair with her blessing? I said. If Barrow hadn't changed jobs, nothing would have changed. I believe Grace may be planning to move in with Luke Robert Barrow when he starts working in St. Louis. If Grace could prove that I was having an affair, it would justify in her eyes filing for divorce. Shit, Cheryl said. I can see Grace doing something like that. It's become acceptable in our society to blame the opposition for something you've already done. It's an effective way to take your eyes off your own behavior. Ed, if you find proof on one of these Thursday evenings, Cheryl said, call me and I'll have the dispatcher have a couple of blues call her and her lover and tell them you were in an accident. That way I can get a detailed police report on what state they were dressed or undressed in and where they ended up. A few of the cops would like to get a little revenge on the DA for what he's done against them in the past. Kathy looked over and said, Dale Allen Britton left the DA's office 4 months ago because he could no longer work for him and opened his own practice. I faxed his office everything we have so far, and he's expecting you. You'd better hurry. Ed, give Dale my regards and best wishes, Cheryl said, and tell him we still miss him. I walked out the door to meet the man who was on his way to the Supreme Court with the women's right to life movement because of Roe versus Wade. The way he looked at the law and how to apply it put everything he was involved with upside down. Things were getting clearer. Grace and I had started having marital problems right after she started working for Luke Barrow. That's when I was promoted to sales manager and had to start traveling 24 hours a day to meet with salespeople. If they were still having an affair every Thursday night, I had been their unknowing cuckold for over 15 years. They had to laugh at me behind my back. Now the expensive Christmas and birthday presents from Luke made sense. Dale was waiting for me when I got out of the car. I found out that Cheryl had called him about our plans. Dale had even supplied me with the key I needed to access Luke Barrow's house and the code to disable the alarm system if it was set. He handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it. At this number, he said, you will find those who can provide you with the service at a reasonable price. I have spoken to them, and they are waiting for your call. He explained he grew up on the street and still has connections to pull some things off. The codes for the Barrow home, he said, will be in effect until the end of next week, and then Luke Barrow will receive a monthly reminder to change his access codes. He was going to sue Barrow for child support from the day April was born. Luke Barrow was going to have a lot of expenses. Under state law, you couldn't get rid of it by declaring bankruptcy. If Dale got his way, his former boss would be broke before he was done. He was going to sue my wife, Grace, accusing her of adultery, abandonment, and fraud for knowingly passing off Luke Barrow's daughter as mine. It was Dale who offered to temporarily transfer my parental rights to April to my parents until the court case was settled. I asked him why. Dale explained that way they couldn't say you were using April against them. I know Luke will go after you as dirty and sneaky as he can. He'll treat you the same way he treats all the lowlifes. Give them maximum time for the slightest offense. Sometimes the best offense is the greatest offense. I offered to use my debit card to prepay for his services, and he said no. Your wife will see it right away and can guess what you are doing. Write me a check, and I will hold on to it until they are serviced. As soon as I left, I knew from his thoughts that everything he was doing was to give me an advantage and time to figure things out. Kathy really found the best thing for me. I was left with the impression that Dale had his own reason for pursuing Luke Barrow in this way. Both Grace and Luke were about to face shit they never thought possible. Dale Britton had just created his own version of the divorce game. I signed all the necessary paperwork for my parents to get parental rights to April as of Friday and gave them a copy. After Dale and I explained the whole situation to them, they agreed that it made sense. I was waiting for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002-year-old model Ford Taurus. David was going on his first sales trip. Cheryl would leave her car at my place and take David home. My oldest told me that their mom wouldn't be home for dinner as she was going to join the girls right after work. As soon as Cheryl arrived, everything was switched over and I threw my suitcase in the trunk. Ed, Cheryl said. Dispatch and all the guys on board. All I need is to know where. Thanks, I said. Dale said to call him if things got going so he could personally serve them. I'd like to know why Dale wants Luke Barrow out. With Dale, it's a matter of principle, Cheryl said. Luke has trouble backing up what he says. It was interesting to watch Grace and Luke drive away in their cars. Both stopped at Charlie's Bar and Grill and had a first-class steak each. Then one went one way and the other went the other. I, on the other hand, just pulled up to Luke Barrow's house and waited. Dale's friends and my crew had already set up. I was in a safe place with a direct view of Luke's house. Grace was the first to show up. After entering the code into the box to disable the alarm, she used her own key to unlock the door. We filmed her long enough to see her enter the house. 10 minutes later, Luke pulled up. Grace opened the door to greet him. Her blouse was completely open and her bra was missing. Her full cleavage was on full display. Luke pulled Grace into his arms and gave her a deep, loving kiss. As they kissed, I noticed his hands began to play with her breasts. As soon as they closed the door, I stopped filming. 6 of the 8 rooms in Luke's house were wired for video and sound. Luke Barrow's neighbor's son was serving a long prison sentence. He agreed to let us use his house as a base. Everything that was filmed at the Barrow house was streamed live to all the Facebook pages they were connected to. We found out that I had a crew following my car because Grace believed I would take the bait and start looking for a new mistress as early as tonight. Since she knew my schedule, they hooked up with a prostitute they hired because she knew my taste. I texted Cheryl to let her know what I had just overheard. She called her husband David to let him know he was being followed. Being a former Marine, he took direct protective action and intentionally drove his car off the road at 10 o'clock at night. He then had to call a tow truck to get it out. He called his wife to report the accident. She texted me. I replied that everything was fine and gave her the address. While I waited to see what would happen, I slipped over to the Barrows house and took the valves out of all the tire rods on their car because I didn't want them to have a chance to start cleaning up the mess they would be in. The lovers wouldn't be going anywhere for a long time. The police officers, flashing their blue lights, pulled up to the house and began looking for Grace Adams. Luke Barrows tried to deny her presence until the officers pointed out that her car was parked in the driveway. Finally, Grace appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a sheet. "Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband Edward Paul's car was involved in an accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. It was your parents who offered to find you here when you couldn't be found." I took great pleasure in seeing Grace's face turn white. The policeman had deliberately lied to her to make them both uncomfortable. After that, the police officers got into their cruiser and drove off, and I followed them, keeping up with them. From the moment the police arrived until the moment they left, everything was recorded and streamed live on Facebook. We had proof that the case was ongoing, and so did the people of the Cape. At midnight, my oldest daughter Amy called. "Daddy, Mom isn't home yet, and my calls are going to her answering machine. I'm starting to worry that she doesn't usually come in this late. What should I do?" "Call Luke Barrow and ask him to put you through to your mother," I said, sending her the number. "What does her boss have to do with this?" Amy asked. "He's been her girlfriend on Thursdays for over 16 years, I said. I hung up and sent Amy part of a clip of Grace in a sheet talking to the cops and Luke Barrow, wearing nothing but pajama pants, from the burning phone. 10 minutes later, Amy called again and said, "Mom's phone suddenly worked again." She called me. She said she was on Lower East Broadway with 4 flat tires. I realized she was lying and told her it couldn't be true because it was right next door to Luke Barrow's house. She said she was telling me the truth, and I told her I saw a clip of her and her lover talking to the cops. She told me what the clip was, and I sent it to her. Mom couldn't explain to me why she was wearing a sheet. I wasn't expecting her home for a few hours, but you could do me a favor and open the front door, I said. I was getting out of the car when my daughter Amy saw me. She watched me take my suitcase out of the trunk and walk toward her. No sooner had I set my suitcase on the floor than my cell phone rang. It was Dale Allen Britton. I answered it and put it on speaker. "Ed, I just served them both at his house," Dale said. "Now your wife and her lover are forbidden to come within 500 feet of you and your children. I will notify the Cape Police Department before I return home. Do yourself a favor. Don't talk to her at all," Dale added. "If she shows up even for clothes, call the police." "Got it, and so did my oldest daughter," I said. "Thanks, Dale." "Amy, go open the garage so I can move Cheryl's car into it," I said. "I have to be in Little Rock." That's what we did. "Dad, is that why the locksmith came around 6 to change the locks?" asked Amy. "Yeah, it was done at the last minute," I said. "I got Kathy to order it because it was becoming obvious that it was going to go the way we planned." "What brought this on?" asked Amy. "The DNA test your grandfather sent to Ancestry.com," I said. "They got a match on April. He told me about it at work on Monday. When I contacted the woman, it turns out your mother's boss is her son, who she gave up for adoption when she was 15. Amy, my daughter, lost her temper. I held her tightly until she calmed down. Then we turned off the lights and went into the kitchen to talk quietly. I turned on the tape recorder and let Amy listen to the conversation her mother and I had when we were driving back from Nashville. It was very informative to hear her mother's words from her own mouth. "Why does Mom want you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy asked. "To negate the repercussions of what she did, should it be found out," I said. It's sad that her assumption led to the truth coming out. There was a quiet knock on the door. Since I wasn't supposed to be home, Amy answered it. It was a police officer who informed us that they had stopped the cab Grace was in and told her that she would be violating a court order if she drove on. My eldest daughter and I discussed all of this for the rest of the evening. We both agreed that Grace should have been a writer because she always had a story to tell about her girlhood. "I still can't believe Mom had an ongoing affair with the same man for over 16 years, Amy said. "Why didn't we see that?" "That was easy," I said. "You kids were young. I was a sales manager who had to travel regularly to different states for meetings every week. Out of trust in us as a couple, I saw no reason not to give your mom my blessing for weekly night outings with the girls. We all trusted her," Amy said. "That's what made us blind to what was going on behind the scenes." I sat stunned. If my daughter hadn't said that, I never would have seen it. She was the one who had used our trust in her that had allowed her to go unpunished for so long. Amy saw the tears filling my eyes and said, "That's what hurts the most. It's not the cheating or the lying. It's the realization that she used our beliefs about her deliberately as a tool to continue the only relationship that meant anything to her. If your mother did that to someone she claimed to love," I said, "imagine what she'll do to us when she starts hating us for what she's going through." Amy got up to make us both a fresh cup of coffee. At that moment, I realized that dawn had already begun. A text notification came to my phone. "It's from your mom. She'd like to be able to talk to me as soon as possible," I said. "She says that my eldest and I have some family issues that we need to discuss before I return from my trip." "How are you going to respond to her?" my daughter asked worriedly. "Don't worry, be happy, Luke, and you can still laugh at the big dumbass behind my back," I said as I wrote this. "You can still move to St. Louis with Luke Barrow, which was your plan all along, just not with our kids." Amy looked at me in utter shock. "Your mother doesn't need me anymore," I said. My usefulness to her was exhausted. She wanted me to have an affair so she could use it against me in divorce court. She didn't think for a second that after all this time she'd be caught. It must have been very painful for Amy to hear the words I wrote to her mother. Not many people are able to recognize the pure truth about anything. Most will call the one who reveals it all the nasty names they know because the real truth hurts. In time, they will accept it. I stood up and took my daughter in my arms as she began to shed tears again. We managed to calm her down before we heard Eric and April stirring. I turned on the TV in the kitchen to Channel Covos 12 to watch the local morning news like I always did. Soon they were having breakfast to start the day. They were surprised to see me at home. We were all surprised to see an image of my wife on the screen. My son turned up the volume out of curiosity. At that moment, I felt sorry for my children because Luke and she were discussing how stupid and dumb I was. Grace said bluntly, "That fool is such a moron and he doesn't notice everything going on around him." Then their mother made a sarcastic remark about me which made them both burst into laughter. Then the reporter spoke. "I don't think they're laughing anymore," he said. After watching 5 hours of the longtime lovers' Facebook behavior live, their plan to set Edward Adams up with a professional prostitute so she would divorce him and take everything he had blew their minds. In the next scene, Dale sues them both. The reporter explained what the lawsuits were for. Alice just ran over to me and sat on my lap sobbing. It was a hell of an unpleasant way for a 16-year-old girl to find out that her father was not her biological father, but her mother's longtime lover. Eric summed it up by saying, "If you're just a piece of shit in your mom's eyes, what does that do to the rest of us?" Once April calmed down, Amy helped me explain what had happened since my mom and I got back from Nashville. I called the school and asked them to release them from school for Friday and Monday to give them time to adjust and deal with their emotions. This story is far from over. The final chapter is just around the corner, and trust me, it's going to be worth the wait. Stay tuned, because the most intense twists and shocking revelations are yet to come. Don't miss it.